Welcome back in Live Now. I'm Austin Westfall. All of this that we've been discussing is all happening because we've been talking about Iran's nuclear program. That's what the U.S. and Iran were working to negotiate a ramp down of for 60 days up until Israel began striking Iran. Now we're hearing from the Wall Street Journal that VP Vance is signaling that Iran's enriched uranium stockpile is still intact after the U.S.'s strike in Iran. Standing by is Andrea Stricker. She's the Deputy Director of the Foundation for the Defense of Democracy's Non-Proliferation and Biodefense Program. She's an expert on the spread of nuclear weapons, and specifically, she follows Iran very closely. Andrea, VP Vance signaling this. I got to ask you, how much of a hurdle is this, if true, how much of a hurdle is this to closing a path to a bomb if their enriched uranium stockpile is intact?
Great to be with you, Austin. A lot has changed in the last roughly 24 hours. We have around 22,000 Iranian centrifuges eliminated, 3 enrichment sites, our uranium conversion facility, and weaponization capabilities. Remaining, of course, is the question of this stock of highly enriched uranium, which is enough for 9 to 10 nuclear weapons, maybe more depending on how much of the 20% material Iran managed to move. Now, a lot of this was kept at the Isfahan nuclear site in tunnels. And from the battle damage assessments we're seeing from open source satellite imagery, it looks as though the tunnels were targeted by the United States. So it remains to be seen whether Iran has managed to keep its hands on that HEU, that highly enriched uranium, and retains the option to enrich it to weapons grade at some kind of a secret facility.
How big of a hit did Iran's nuclear program take yesterday? If you could put it in layman's terms, how would you explain this to folks that don't know a single thing about how nuclear programs operate?
I would say it's a massive hit. They have eliminated, the United States and Israel together, most of its nuclear weapons option. And so while we're talking about this question of where the HEU is, we can at least be a little bit confident that they don't, in the short term at least, likely have the ability to weaponize the material, so to create or construct a nuclear device. Israel had already hit all of the weaponization facilities, equipment, and around 14 nuclear scientists that it knew about prior to the US strike. So while we do need to see what the battle damage assessment looks like and account for remaining hidden assets, at least in the short term, they likely wouldn't be able to sprint to a nuclear weapon.
You know, we've been talking about the nuclear scientists being targeted. How expendable are nuclear scientists? If those minds get eliminated, how easy is it to get something like that back?
That's a great question. And so in Iran, there are very few scientists that have expertise from the nuclear weapons program that Iran had up until mid-2003, which was called the Ahmad Plan. And so a lot of these senior people, in their middle age, some of whom were working on new nuclear weapons activities, would really represent a brain trust of knowledge in the country. Certainly, they have trained people below them, but in the short term, the medium term, it really, I think Israel and the United States think it did significant damage to the regime's ability to weaponize in the immediate term.
So what we're looking at on the screen are the 3 facilities that the U.S. struck yesterday, about 24 hours now ago at this time. Fordo is the one we've been discussing the most. That was the most critical nuclear site. Natanz was Iran's largest uranium enrichment center. Isfahan is believed to be a repository of near bomb-grade nuclear fuel. Andrea, let's say the U.S. Strikes again. President Trump has said it's possible if Iran doesn't come to the negotiating table. What might be the other obvious high-profile nuclear targets, if there are any, beside the 3 that we're already looking at on the screen here?
Apart from a hidden enrichment plant, which is always a possibility, he could be looking at additional weaponization facilities. And then there is this question of a hidden mountain facility next to the Natanz complex, and it's buried even more deeply than the Fordow plant, so around 100 meters below the mountain. It's called Mount Kalangazla, or Pickaxe Mountain. And that's a concern because Iran was about to start up this facility. The latest assessment we have is that in April it was nearing completion, and it likely would have the floor space to house even more centrifuges than the 3,000 centrifuge plant at Fordow. And it might even be more difficult for the United States to destroy. It could even be impenetrable. And so we need to know if this facility is in play right now. And if it is, then we definitely would need a follow-up B-2 strikes if the Iranians start to bring it online and do any kind of nuclear weapons activities in that plant.
So Iran has denied that significant damage was done to Fordow. Is there any room for any bit of truth in that? What level of certainty do we have that the 6 bunker buster bombs, the 30,000-pound bombs that were that struck Fordow, how certain are we, and how do we know that, in fact, it did destroy that facility? Or, in another way of phrasing the question is, how do we know that Iran is wrong in denying that significant damage didn't happen to that building?
Well, the U.S. is fairly confident that the facility is significantly damaged. And when we're talking about centrifuges, they're very delicate machines. And so to be struck by numerous massive bombs like that would likely render them inoperable, regardless if the facility itself is somehow still standing. And I think regardless, the facility is out of commission for the foreseeable because it is essentially entombed in this mountain. Nobody can reach it, and it's likely not going to be an ideal place for Iran to make nuclear weapons grade material.
This is something I asked you last time you were on. I think it's worth asking again today. How do we know that, given all the conversation about Fordow ahead of the strikes, how do we know that some of the pertinent hardware inside that facility wasn't moved from that location before the strikes occurred?
I believe some of the HEU, the highly enriched uranium, was likely moved. We saw trucks and Iranian trucks in front of the facility, likely moving the material, perhaps to the Esfahan tunnels, perhaps somewhere else. We know that they had made around 9 to 10 nuclear weapons worth, but there was pretty good assurance that that was in the Esfahan tunnels. And so it probably was around 2,700 centrifuges down in that facility. Around 1,000 of those were the basic Iranian centrifuges, and around 1,700 were the more advanced, faster models. So regardless, it's a significant hit, and it really prevents the regime from using that facility, I would say, if not permanently, then for years to come.
What questions do you have moving forward?
Well, certainly we want to know if there are any secret enrichment facilities. We would like to account for that highly enriched uranium stock. And then we want to know if Iran plans to respond to the United States in any way. It's hitting Israel with missiles this evening, or at least attempting to. And we have to recall that the last time the U.S. took out Qasem Soleimani, the head of the IRGC Quds Force, in 2020, Iran waited around 5 days before responding. And so I know our military personnel and our bases are likely preparing for some kind of a response. But the Iranians really have to be careful that they're not going to provoke an even higher rung of escalation from the United States and risk the supreme leader being taken out, even since the US and Israel seem to know his whereabouts.
So you mentioned the idea of secret sites. How likely is it that there are secret nuclear sites that US and Israeli intelligence hasn't quite picked up on?
Look, it's always a possibility, but I think the US and Israel, especially Israel, has penetrated Iran so significantly that they have reasonable assurance that they got a lot of the ones that would be in play: conversion, enrichment, centrifuge production, and then the weaponization capabilities. So I think we don't need to be extremely concerned about a breakout to nuclear weapons, at least in the months and possibly even the years ahead, with this significant step by the US.
So I saw you post about 5 hours ago on Twitter that the IAEA's initial assessment from the U.S. strikes, Agency Director General, gave this. They said this. The organization can deploy nuclear safety and security experts to Iran, in addition to our safeguards inspectors, wherever they are needed. My question is, how much does the state of Iran typically cooperate with an organization like the IAEA?
It's a great question, and whether the IAEA is in fact going to be let back into Iran remains a big question mark. And they were at least accounting for the nuclear material in Iran. That's why we have such good indication of where the centrifuges and the enriched uranium was to begin with. The Iran did not cooperate very well with the IAEA as far as its nuclear weapons activities. And by some estimates, at least Israel's and the one that the White House adopted, that put them around 2 weeks from being able to assemble a nuclear device. You know, some estimates were longer, up to 6 months to a crude weapon. So I think the Iranians have played cat and mouse for quite a long time with the IAEA. Everyone has let Tehran get away with its nuclear activities, getting so close to atomic weapons. That's why we've had to see US and Israel take military action to stop them.
You would know just as well as anybody. How many years' worth of progress on the nuclear program was destroyed yesterday, likely?
So Iran has been working on the nuclear weapons activity since the late 90s, but they've been laying the basis since the early 1990s, if not the 80s. So this is significant equipment and infrastructure that has been destroyed in the last 2 weeks. So I believe they're set back for months and years into the future, certainly multiple years if they wanted to even try to restore all that they had and lost.
What are the remaining concerns about their nuclear program? What's left at this point? And I suppose, what should be the threads that we're following in the days and weeks ahead?
I believe Israel and the U.S. are going to be listening closely. We saw Benjamin Netanyahu speaking earlier, and he said that he has a good indication of where the highly enriched uranium is. I believe they're keeping good ears and eyes on that. And if they see any intelligence that it gives them an opportunity to strike it, I think we could see the U.S. or Israel, or perhaps together, taking out that remaining threat that Iran would use to go to weapons grade in the future.
Andrea Stricker is the Deputy Director of the Foundation for the Defense of Democracy's Non-Proliferation and Biodefense Program. We appreciate your time. Take care.
Thank you.
All right, let's slide away for our first break of the hour. A live look at the White House. 9 minutes past 10 p.m. at this point, 7:09 on the West Coast. We'll be back in a moment.